Okay, so we'll start with the homage to the Buddha 3 times. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, good morning everybody. And today is July 11th, 2015. And so we're resuming after a long interval. And today we'll be taking a group of suttas in the Majjhima Nikaya which are united by a similar title and a similar topic. So the general title that governs this group of suttas is the Bhaddekaratta Sutta. And so this is sutta number 131, which is on page 1039. And then there are 3 other suttas which have basically the same title, the same subject, and they're distinguished only by the name of a particular monk who is either the speaker of the sutta or in some way figures in the sutta. Okay, the title itself is already a bit problematic. And so there have been different translations of this title. In the first edition of the middle-length discourses, where I just let Venerable Nyanamoli's translation stand. So Venerable Nyanamoli translated it, one fortunate attachment. But on reflection, I came to consider that that was a wrong translation. Okay, the title, or the word, okay, so we have the word Buddha in Pali, which can mean good or excellent. Fortunate is a little bit of a stretch, since it doesn't imply fortune, but just being good or excellent. Then there is the word eka, which means one. And then the word ratta, this is where the differences in interpretation arise. Okay, how Nyanamoli got one fortunate attachment. You see, the word ratta could be the past participle of a verb rajati, which also gives us the noun raga. So rajati means to be attached, but usually in the sense of being full of passion for something, or being full of lust for something. And so raga, the noun, comes to mean passion, lust, or attachment in that strong sense. And so it seems that Nyanamoli took ratta to be a noun based on this past participle, meaning attachment. And so he took it to be somebody who has one attachment, and that attachment is good. So he had one fortunate attachment. Okay, another monk in Sri Lanka, his name is Bhikkhu Jnanananda. He interpreted Bhaddekaratta. He used the translation, ideal solitude. I think that was the general title, but he used the idea of one who is devoted to ideal solitude. Since, he took Buddha again as good or excellent, Eka as one, but he extended it in the meaning to give the sense of solitude, and Ratta as being attached to in the sense of devoted to. So one who is devoted to good or excellent solitude. Again, this is, I would say, it's a stretch of the original meaning. And I think it fits Venerable Jnanananda's personality very well, because he's always been very devoted to living as a monk in solitude. But the word ratta can also be taken as related to, there's a more common word for night, which is rati. In Sanskrit, ratri. But in Sanskrit, you could also have ratra, meaning night. And so, if we turn this into Pali, then you would also get ratta. And so this is where we get a single night, which is good, or what do we have here? A single excellent night. Okay, one way we might think to resolve this ambiguity in the title is to look, for example, at the Chinese translation, hoping we could get some light there. But the Chinese have sort of escaped the problem by transliterating the word. So they have, I copied it down, badi loti. Or another edition has bado loti, which are just attempts to put Bhaddeka, to use Chinese characters that will give those sounds. So it's transliterated. But there is a Tibetan translation which has the Sanskrit title. And I think that there might have been some fragments also recovered from Central Asia of the Sanskrit edition, or Sanskrit manuscripts. And that has Bhaddekaratta. Yeah, this is correct. Yeah, so the way it came, when it was transposed into Sanskrit, Bhadra just becomes Bhadraka. Basically, they're just two forms of the same word. And Ratri clearly means night. So in the Sanskrit version, it comes out an excellent night, a good night. Whereas in Pali, it's a little more specific by using the word eka, which means one. And I think this is supported by the text of the verses, as we'll see, rather than one fortunate attachment or one who is devoted to ideal solitude. Okay, now we can turn to the text of the sutta itself. Okay, and so this sutta takes place when the Buddha is living in Savatthi at Chaita's Grove. And then he addresses the monks and he says, I shall teach you the summary and exposition of, here it's one who has had a single excellent night. Okay, so there are two aspects that the Buddha announces in the opening to the sutta. You could see that he speaks of a summary and an exposition. And this is a common way in which the Buddha presents his teaching. In fact, a number of the suttas that occur in this particular chapter of the Majjhima Nikaya are developed out of these two ideas. One is called in Pali Udesa. Ooh, lack of mindfulness. I should apologize to the machine. Okay, the word that's translated synopsis in Pali is udesa. So this is the brief presentation of the teaching. So often the Buddha will just give a very short, very concise statement. And sometimes the Buddha will just give the short statement, the udesa, then he gets up and leaves. And then the monks are perplexed. What is the meaning of that? And then they start discussing amongst themselves, who can explain this to us? And it seems that the Buddha has gone into his cottage and shut the door. And so then they go to one of the other monks. Usually it's either Mahakachana or Ananda. Okay, the counterpart to the Udesa is what is called the Vibhanga. The Vibhanga would be the analysis of the principles that are contained in the short statement or summary, the analysis or exposition. And so in the suttas, the word Vibhanga is used, which comes from the verb bhanjati, which means to break. So Vibhanga is, you could say, it's the breakdown or analysis of the teaching. But it seems that the really proper counterpart of the Udesa should be Nidesa, which comes to be used in the commentaries to mean the exposition or the elaboration. So the concise teaching is the Udesa. Sometimes this is also called, don't want to overload people who are not studying Pali with Pali words, but the Buddha sometimes gives the teaching, he explains sankitena, that is, in brief or concisely. And then either the Buddha himself or somebody else will give vitarena, that means he will explain in detail. So Sankitena, the brief teaching, is the udesa, the concise statement, and Vitarena, the teaching given, the elaborate teaching, is the vibhanga, the analysis, or the exposition. Okay, so now the Buddha is announcing to the monks that he's going to give both the brief teaching, or the summary, and the exposition of one who has had a single excellent night. Okay, then he begins to speak, and Venerable Nyanamoli, this is Venerable Nyanamoli's translation, he's translated it somewhat poetically, or a bit eloquently, not so literally. So he says, "Let not a person revive the past." I think literally the expression used would be, let not a person go back, run back to the past. Or on the future build his hopes. Yeah, I have actually in the notes a more literal rendering. Let not a person run back to the past or live in expectation of the future. For the past has been left behind, and the future has not been reached. Okay, so these are the kinds of advice to be given. In fact, you'll see that the whole poem is about kind of advice given for somebody who is developing insight or vipassana. Okay, so the future, the past has been left behind, the future has not been reached. Then I think the key to the verse, the next two lines are the key to the verse. Instead, with insight, let him see each presently arisen state. So in Pali, it's pachupanang yo dhammang tata tata vipassati. So tata tata pachupanang dhammang, that means the presently arisen dharma or phenomena. And then tata tata vipassati, he sees it in this way and in that way. Or he sees it on this occasion, on that occasion. So as each presently arisen state arises, one contemplates it with insight. And according to the Chinese translation of this, or the Chinese counterpart, the parallel, it says that he sees it with insight, each presently arisen state, as being unstable, or unlasting, which implies the characteristic of impermanence. So he's seeing it as impermanent. And then the commentary to the sutta says that he sees each presently arisen state, this is the Pali commentary, by way of what are called the seven contemplations, the seven contemplations of insight. That is, one sees it as impermanent, as dukkha, or bound up with suffering, as anatta, non-self, and then one sees it nibbida, nibbidanupassana, contemplating it in a way that leads to disenchantment. Viraga-anupassana, one sees it in a way that leads to dispassion. Nirodha-anupassana, one sees its cessation. And Patinisaga-anupassana, one sees it while relinquishing attachments to it. Okay, so that's a kind of commentarial elaboration, but the Buddha just uses the expression, one sees it as it arises in the present with insight. One sees it clearly. And then he uses the words to indicate how one maintains the mind when one is seeing it. He says, invincibly, unshakably, asang hirang, asan kupang. Okay, so this would indicate that one remains steady and strong and clear in the insight, so that one cannot be shaken by distraction, by disturbance, but the mind is continuously focused one-pointedly on the present moment, observing whatever is arising, and then as it perishes, one takes the next phenomena that arises. So in a way, you could say that line, invincibly, unshakably, maybe we should put like a division of stanzas here and say that marks the end of the first part of the poem. And then the second part that comes now is a kind of urge or incitement to develop a sense of urgency to undertake this practice now, not postponing to the future. So he says, today the effort must be made. Tomorrow death may come, who knows? So death can come at any time. We have no foreknowledge when death will strike. So the effort must be made today. Again, this emphasis on today, that, to my mind, reinforces the interpretation of the sutta, of the topic of the sutta as being an excellent night. Because in Pali, actually, the word ratta or rati, night, can cover a 24-hour cycle. So it's not just the nighttime as opposed to the daytime, but we say, we use the expression this day to refer to a 24-hour cycle. But in the Indian languages, North Indian languages, the word that covers the 24-hour cycle or the word rati, night, can cover the 24-hour cycle. Okay, so today the effort must be made, tomorrow death may come, who knows? No bargain with mortality can keep him and his hordes away. So this is now, for mortality, the text uses the word machu, not the English word macho, meaning somebody with a hyper-masculine type, but machu. So machu also means death, but sometimes it takes on, we call it a more personalized representation of death. So as the word marana, the usual word for death, just signifies the event of dying, but machu sometimes becomes depicted almost like the overlord of death, the lord of death. And it becomes almost synonymous with Mara. And so we have, in numbers of verse texts, Machu Raja, the king of death. And so the personalized depiction is indicated here by keeping him and his hordes or his army away. I remember when I got the first proofs of this back, could be 1993, something like that, when Wisdom Publications was typesetting it and I was in Sri Lanka, they sent me the proofs. And somehow the typist, the person who was typing, had typed in here, a bargain with mortality can keep him and his hordes away. And I thought, wow, this is really the subtle work of Mara taking over the mind of the typist. And I had been reading, all of the other typesetting had been just so accurate that I was becoming a little bit lackadaisical in reading the proof. And I almost skipped over that. And suddenly, just something registered with me. Something's wrong there. Then I looked again, and a bargain with mortality, that's exactly what it's not saying. Okay, so no bargain with mortality can keep him and his hordes away, but one who dwells thus ardently, that is, who is ardently devoted to this unshakable, invincible, insight contemplation of the present moment, relentlessly, by day, by night. And here, by day, by night, we have what is called in Pali a compound. What kind of compound is it? No, it's not a Bahubihi. Okay, Aho is day, and Rata is night. So it's a dual compound used adverbally. It's an adverb. Dyadic compound, Vanda compound. But it's used adverbally. So here, because we have the word Rata here, meaning night, this reinforces again my conviction that in the original title, night is intended, not devotion to or attachment to. So then the verse ends, it is he, the peaceful sage, this is Santo Muni. It's an epithet for the Buddha. The peaceful sage has said, who has, it uses Bhaddekaratta. So this is what has been translated here. One who has had a single excellent night. And so I would take the expression Bhaddekaratta, which is interestingly and bit perplexingly, the expression itself is not analyzed anywhere in the text, and it occurs only in this group of suttas, not elsewhere in the canon. So searching throughout the rest of the canon to try to find an explanation, it's futile. I know that because now with the electronic search programs, we can search the whole canon and the expression will only turn up here. Okay, so this is what the Buddha calls the summary, or it's the brief statement, the synopsis of Bhaddekaratta. But now the Buddha is going on his own initiative. He's going to give. Maybe at this point I'll ask whether there's any questions on this and anything that's been covered so far, apart from the questions of the meaning of these lines, which is going to be explained in the exposition or analysis. Richard.
Yeah, you're saying that no bargain with mortality, that you're saying that was associated with Mara.
I'm saying that the word Machu is sometimes used, yes, particularly in the form Machu Raja, the king of mortality, is used as a designation for Mara.
So I'm wondering, how is this related, say, to the Christian idea that that Mephisto will want one to bargain with him. Is this similar to that? I mean, that is because Mephisto is sort of a Christian notion that corresponds to Mara.
Yeah.
But I hadn't heard about, I don't know any bargaining with mortality or a king of mortality in Western, in the Western idioms.
Yeah.
But is there some connection between this and the idea of bargaining with the devil? Is it similar?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the idea of bargaining with the devil is that he does some favor for you, and you commit your soul to the devil in order to get some worldly favor.
Yeah.
Like the devil says that he'll arrange things so that you become a great success in business or a famous sports star. But when you die, then your soul goes to the devil. This is it's very unique or very seldom in the Buddhist literature that one finds an expression like this. And I think this occurs here only because it's a verse, so it's using more metaphorical and personified ideas.
Well, the content of this bargain is simply the postponement of death. Is that right? There's not another bargain going on with mortality.
Yeah, it's not elaborated in any way. Just the expression is used.
Okay.
Barbara.
It occurs to me that the Western equivalent is the Grim Reaper. And we talk about staying ahead of the Grim Reaper or not letting him catch up.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not so familiar with that. I mean, I know the expression Grim Reaper. It's supposed to be death who reaps everything. But making a bargain with the Grim Reaper, that I don't know.
No, I think we tend to talk about staying ahead of him or staying out of his way.
Yeah. Chris, is that your name?
Sorry?
Chris, is that?
Yeah, thanks. Instead with insight that we see each presently arisen state. So the word state here, you said it was Dhamma?
It's the word Dhamma, yeah.
And so why is it rendered as state instead of like phenomenon?
I mean, this is the problem in rendering the word Dhamma used in that sense of an entity, a concrete thing. It's a matter of personal choice. I actually prefer, sometimes I use phenomena. I think it was Nyanamoli who used state here. So in verses, I think also Nyanamoli was trying to work with a meter, and phenomena doesn't fit so well into the meter. Okay, I think we'll continue. Okay, so now the Buddha is going to give the analysis or the exposition. And so he starts off with how a person does not revive the past, or how he does not run back to the past. Okay, so he says, how does one revive the past? Then he says, one nurtures delight there, thinking, I had such material form in the past. And similarly with each of the other aggregates. So in other words, one calls each of the aggregates to mind, or usually, an ordinary person doesn't think in terms of the aggregates, but rather he'll be thinking simply in terms of past experience. I had such an experience in the past. But from the Buddha's perspective, the way one analyzes that experience will be an experience in terms of either one or another of the five aggregates. So one had such, maybe thinking in the past, I had such a body. That would be the case of form. I used to be youthful and healthy, handsome, well, I'm still handsome, and I had full head of hair. Now, even if I let my hair grow, it wouldn't be very full. And clear, bright skin. So one thinks of all of those things, of one's own body, or other forms, bodies that one experienced in the past, or physical objects experienced, or one thinks of one's past feelings, or perceptions, things one saw, heard, sensed in other ways, one's volitional activities, what ideas one had, what plans, one's projects, what undertakings one made, and one's consciousness, what one was aware of in the past, or the state, you could say maybe the functioning of one's mind in the past. And one thinks about all of these, bringing, the text uses the expression, nurturing delight, or bringing delight to bear upon them. Okay, then the case of not reviving the past is that one doesn't nurture delight about them, thinking I had such form in the past, such feeling, perception, volitional activities, consciousness in the past. Now this raises a question, and I'm not quite sure how to resolve this question, or even, exactly, the Pali itself is a little ambiguous in that it could be taken to mean that one thinks about the past without bringing delight upon it, or one does not think of the past at all with thoughts of delight. Do you see the difference here? One is that one could think about the past, but one shouldn't bring delight to bear upon those thoughts of the past. And the other is that one shouldn't delight in thinking about the past.
But how does one contemplate when you just went to a class? It's the past. You contemplate what's happened, but there's no delight in it. I mean, you just contemplate it without...
Okay, I want to give my explanation of the two ways to understand this. Well, first I would say there's two ways to understand this. This is my sort of interpretation. And I think I developed this in contrast to, do you know of J. Krishnamurti? He was a famous sort of Indian, he was resident in the United States and California, but originally from India, a kind of radical philosophical thinker, in a way a spiritual teacher, though he would always say, I don't take any personal disciples. But he would always say that the problem of the human mind, the problem of human existence is memory, thinking about the past. And so he seemed to be saying that to become spiritually free, one has to obliterate memory. But it would make me wonder that, if he's made a plan for like a speaking tour, I have engagements to go to. When I was in graduate school, he came to our graduate school to give a series of talks. I mean, he had to have like a plan, like, okay, on such and such a day, I'll be going to Claremont giving talks there. So you have to remember things. Okay, so the way I would understand this is that, in general, sort of the general advice is that in one's day-to-day activities, one can't avoid thinking of the past. And even the Buddha gives discourses when he says, in the past, Pu Bei, when I was a bodhisattva, not yet enlightened, the thought occurred to me, household life is bondage, the life gone forth is free, let me cut off my hair and beard and go forth. So he has recollections, and then he tells about going to Alara Kalama and Ramaka, Alara Kalama Udaka Ramaputta, the conversations he had with them, the experiences he had with them. So he has memories, even the Buddha has memories. So the problem is not memory per se, but it's going back and thinking sort of longingly what one experienced in the past and trying to recapture that. And this happens even with people, not to speak about sensual pleasures, but even people have this with meditative experiences. Last week when I was meditating, I had such a peaceful state, or my mind was so blissful, and now my mind is just overrun by distracting thoughts, even though I'm practicing so diligently. If I could only recapture that experience that I had in the past. So in a way, that's also running back into the past. Okay, so one way to understand this is that one could think about the past, in fact, one has to think about the past when necessary, but not with these thoughts of longing and this nostalgia to try to recapture the past, and this indulgence in memories of the past. So that is, say, the general advice. But then the specific advice, now the Buddha is speaking about somebody who is a diligent meditator. In that case, one shouldn't even be thinking about, at least when one is actively engaged in the practice, one shouldn't even be thinking about meaningful things in the past, but keeping the mind focused, tatta tatta vipassati, pachupanang yang dhammang tatta tatta vipassati, that one contemplates with insight that presently arisen phenomena. So even if thoughts, memories of the past come up, then one treats them just as presently arisen phenomena and sees them as impermanent. Okay, so this is dealing with the past. Then we come to what's a little freely translated here as building up hope upon the future. More literally, having expectations for the future. So the Buddha says, how does one build up hope upon the future? And he says, one nurtures delight there, thinking, may I have such material form in the future. May I have such feelings, such perceptions, such volitional activities, such consciousness in the future. That's how one builds up hope upon the future. How does one not how does one not build up hope upon the future? One does not nurture delight there, thinking, may I have such material form in the future, such feeling in the future, such perception in the future, such volitional activities in the future, such consciousness in the future. So again, I think this twofold distinction applies to the future. In one's ordinary day-to-day life, of course, it's necessary to have thoughts about the future. Like, in fact, nowadays, we have too many thoughts about the future. Like we have the Zhuangyan calendar, it's prepared for 2015, it's prepared towards the end of 2014. And now getting the calendar prepared in October, it's too late. Now it seems you have to start getting the calendar prepared in July for the next year and filling in all of the dates. So you have to start thinking about the future. When will we have the Chinese New Year celebration? When will we have the fall ritual for the deceased? When will we have the Buddha's birthday celebration? So you don't even know what the lunar calendar looks like, but you have to start filling in the calendar. And then if somebody is like a popular Dhamma teacher, try to to get them for a talk for 2016? No, it's all their calendar's already filled in. You have to start thinking 217, 218. And they're going to get up there and say, keep your mind on the present. Don't let the mind wander to the past and the future. Of course, it's easy because they have it all recorded on machines like this, so they don't have to think about it. Okay, but if we make the twofold distinction, so ordinarily, we have to make plans for the future, and so we have to think about the future. But the ideal way, as the Buddha advises, is without having great expectations for the future. Building up great hopes for the future. Because when we build up great hopes and expectations, things often work out differently from what we expected. And then when things don't work out as expected, then there comes disappointment, disillusionment. Okay, so this is the advice sort of in, we call day-to-day life. Make plans for the future, but without investing great hopes and expectations in them. But again, for the meditator who's practicing insight, then the advice is to keep the mind focused on Pachupannang Dhamma, the presently arisen state, phenomena, factor of experience. So even thoughts about the future arise. Again, one treats them just as presently arisen phenomena. The thoughts arise, they'll be present for some time, they'll pass away. Okay, so this is the past and the future. And then we come to the presently arisen states. And so the Buddha then raises the question, how is one vanquished in regard to presently arisen states? And the verb here that's rendered vanquished, the verb is sanghirati, which connects this line with the line in the verse where we have invincibly, unshakably. So the word that's translated invincibly is asanghirang, not being vanquished. So that ties with this verb. And then the Buddha explains how one is vanquished in regard to the presently arisen dhammas by way of what is called sakkaya ditthi. So this is the view of the person as being or possessing a truly existent self. So sakkaya is from sat, which means existent. Kaya means body, but here in a broad sense, not just the physical body, but it refers to the collection of, or the composite of the five aggregates. And so, as we could see from the explanation that's given here, sakkaya ditthi is the view either of the aggregates as a self or of a self that exists in some relation to the five aggregates. And so we have the exposition that the untaught ordinary person, this is the deluded worldling, who is not acquainted with the teaching, the Dhamma of the noble ones, regards material form as self, that's direct identification, or the self as the owner of material form. The self is somehow a non-material entity that possesses the body, material form. Or the self as material form is existing within the self as a kind of container in which material form is existing, or the self as existing in material form. Then the same four possibilities are applied to the other aggregates: feeling, perception, the volitional activities, consciousness. So we've gone through the Sakkaya Ditthi several times in the past in detail, so we don't have to go into it, elaborate on it here. But the point that's being conveyed here is that the ordinary person, the unenlightened person, by identifying the five aggregates as the self, or in some way the possessions of the self, is being vanquished or conquered by presently arisen states. And then the one who is invincible in regard to presently arisen states, this is the noble disciple who does not regard any of the five aggregates as a self or as the possessions of a self. Okay, so then at the end, the Buddha repeats the entire synopsis or set of verses, and then he says that it was with reference to this that it was said that I shall teach you the summary and exposition of one who has had a single excellent night. Okay, maybe I should ask at this point whether there are any questions. Okay.
Just that one,
just the one little verse there, or self as in consciousness, or consciousness as itself. Can you expound on that a little bit? I know you have in the past, but it just doesn't make sense right now in this.
What I would, I don't actually know how to elaborate all of these in detail, but as a conjecture or a hypothesis, what I would say is that if somebody regards the body as the self, form as the self, then they can hold that consciousness exists within the body. And so consciousness exists in the body, which is the self. So self equals the body, and consciousness exists within the body, therefore within the self. How to take self as existing in consciousness. Anyway, anybody have any ideas about that?
I think therefore I am.
Excuse me?
I think therefore I am. Is that all?
Does it have anything to do with everything is mind?
Maybe, I'm not sure. Generally, the Buddha's positions would be sort of aimed, well, there are a large number of those speculations about the self that were going on during the Buddha's time. Sometimes you could see that the Buddha's position is somewhat aimed at the theory of self emerging from in the Upanishads. Yeah, Richard.
Yeah, well, David Hume is taking the position that consciousness, that self is not a content of consciousness. And when he says, look, I look for everything that's in my consciousness, I find there are these vivid things by which he means sense perceptions, And then there are these vague things, which are ideas, but I don't find any self.
Yeah.
That is, he's taking the same position that the Buddha is taking
Yeah.
regarding self as a content of consciousness.
Yeah, but that is somewhat different from the position which falls into Sakaya Ditti, which takes the self to be in consciousness. The one who says the self exists in consciousness is not saying that the self is just a concept or idea which is constructed by conscious activity, but they're affirming a real self, but that self exists in consciousness in some way.
Right, and that's what I'm saying. That's what Hume is denying.
Oh, I see.
You see? That is, he's taking the same position as the Buddha. He's saying, these people think that there is a solid existence of a thing of some type that they call a self. He says, I don't see one. I don't have one.
Yeah, but we'd have to be, I guess, more thoroughly acquainted with all of the ideas that were, sort of floating around during the Buddha's time. Yeah, I haven't really specifically looked into that. Yeah.
That book I gave you actually, Bhante Dhammajiva expounded on it a little. I was hoping you would be able to.
I didn't get to, you gave it to me last evening, so I didn't get a chance to look at it. Any other questions?
I think when you say self, you denote the body, the name, and the form. And the form denotes consciousness. And it is derived from the past as change from the present actions, as food change from the present actions to what will happen in the future, which would be only overcome by greed and by following the Eight Noble Paths or the Chaturarya Sattva, the Four Noble Truths. So it's a continuation of chariot, which would be only overcome. The present is a continuation of the past, the future is a continuation of the present. But when you overcome greed and you overcome the need to live, mostly as denoted by worldly possessions, then you attain enlightenment. And the way the Buddhists, especially the Theravada sect, denotes as you overcome and get enlightenment is not by overcoming greed in the negative sense, but by attaining enlightenment in studying the reasons for cause and death. Because if you really analyze it, the purpose of living per the human beings is cause and death, to get worldly possessions, which is denoted by greed, selflessness, and foolishness. So if we eradicate the need for that by conquering the mind, either by the Four Noble Paths or the Eight Noble Ways or the Middle Path, then slowly through different existence, as we hope that there is a karmic force which gives rebirth, you get rid of ignorance, you attain, you give up greed, or you attain enlightenment. There is no need to live again.
Okay, so I think we should go on now, because I wanted to cover the 4 Bhaddekaratta Suttas. But the second one, there's not anything that's really additional to it. It's just that the Buddha overhears Ananda explaining the sutta, and he praises Ananda for teaching that sutta.